a universally accepted fact that when competition stagnates, success is inevitable. Now, side proposition has brought you, so far, two major contentions. Firstly, China's economic dominance, and secondly, their international appeal. I, as the second speaker of the proposition, will be presenting our third contention, the stagnation of the competition. But before I go into this, I'd like to clash with some of the points brought up by the opposition. Firstly, the opposition has had two major contentions presented thus far: the global agenda and China's economic unsustainability. Now let's go into the global agenda first. The fact that China is not only unwilling to set the global agenda, but they are also unable to set the global agenda. Let's look at China's unwillingness first. The opposition has said that China has an introverted foreign policy. But what we can see is China is actually making more efforts to not only economically increase their foreign policy and invest into other nations, such as in the Middle East and Africa, but they have also made major foreign policy moves in such places as the Security Council, and they have made they do not have an introverted foreign policy. Rather, they have a foreign policy that serves their own needs, such as the situation in Syria. And what we can see is that China serving its own needs is showing that it can be a major power in the 21st century. Now, this is also compounded with the unwillingness factor and the ability factor. That the opposition has suggested that China is unable to set the global agenda. But we can see with examples such as China being able to stop the meeting between Obama and the Dalai Lama, and China having veto power in the Security Council, that China is very able to assert its foreign policy needs in the 21st century. Now moving on to their second point of the unsustainability in in China, sorry. And what we can see is that they have tried to completely ignore our point of the fact that China will be modernizing and that their decrease in their population will not result in their economic downfall. But let's really go into this. Let's explain this. Ladies and gentlemen, what we can see is that population does not population is not the sole. The amount of capital in a country is not solely dependent upon their population. The amount of economic dominance of a country has is based on their buying power. And if China has, one moment please, if China has less of a population, they are also having an increase in their GDP per capita. That means each individual person in China will have more money to spend and more consumer power, such as the people in America today. We can see that the Americans have more buying power even though they're a smaller population. Yes?
Well, if 44% of your GDP is based upon manufacturing, and you have decreasing population, then yes, you do have a problem.
But the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, as we can see, the change is being made. The patents that China is bringing out will account for that 40% decrease in GDP per capita, and that will come from the amount of new jobs and the amount of better jobs that each Chinese person is going to have. What's better, having a job as a workshop worker or having a job in some sort of engineering firm? What are you going to make more money as, and what are you going to be able to assert your buying power more as? That's the question I pose to you, ladies and gentlemen. Now, furthermore, they've said that that the foreign direct investment has decreased from America by, they said the figure of 11% in 2011. But, ladies and gentlemen, we can see that America has raised their debt ceiling so many times, and that they're in their own economic turmoil, that is probably more of a reason to decrease their investment in China, rather than China becoming less attractive to the American investors. Furthermore, we can say that China's economic influence and dominance is that China is America's largest single investor, and that they're an active role in bailing out the United Nations, the European Union, and it's one of the biggest markets. Now, on to our final contention. And this really leads me into the fact that China, what we can see is that the final contention that we want to bring forward is the fact that not only is China leaping forward, but its competition on the global stage is really stagnating. Now, in the past, whenever a country has gained the century, one common element in every single case was a destructive world event, like the inability for competition to thrive. In the 19th century, we saw that the under-industrializing nations were handicapped by the Napoleonic Wars, while Britain was not, and they had the economic means and stability to progress forward in the Industrial Revolution. In the 20th century, we see in the United States that the destruction of the Second World War was mostly restricted to Europe, and that China was uninhibited by this world catastrophe, and they didn't need to rebuild their infrastructure or put millions of dollars into rebuilding a war-torn country. But rather, they took a chance at investment and progress with economic development, and they became a major world power. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we can see that this has happened again. As the subprime crisis of 2008 formed into a fully fledged global financial crisis, 2009 became the first year that the world recorded a net GDP loss since the Second World War. Over $3.3 trillion wiped out of the global economy. Now, what we can see is China, well, this was not the case. China successfully and efficiently pulled off a major stimulus package. In fact, so efficient that they were the fastest country to recover. So while the rest of the globe attempts to recover, China already has. So while America's debt is almost 70% of their GDP, China, in essence, doesn't have this issue. America and the West is literally using all of their funds and resources to reach an economic zero. China is using their money to invest in new patents, to increase their innovation, and to invest in social and military action and defense, and stimulus. For example, China has invested more into clean energy than any other nation last year. But China has other countries who are also competing with them, right? It's not just the West. Look at the BRICS, Brazil, India, Russia. Well, now let's go into these step by step. Now we look at Russia. And Russia has the smallest and most illiterate population of the three BRICS. And they have been left behind as the scientific power they once were by China's world-beating growth. Now we look at India, which is an underdeveloped and inadequate infrastructure with a lot of illiterate population, which essentially takes down the fact that they would even be it's doubtful that they will reach the potential to compete for a position of world power. For example, they've only experienced a less than 1% per capita growth rate over the last year, and it's doubtful that they will reach that same potential that China has. And lastly, we can look at Brazil. And the fact that Brazil is a place with a growth rate as skimpy as the swimsuits, and they're prey to any financial crisis around. They're chronically unstable, and they're rated 56 of 133 countries in economic competitiveness, whereas China outranks them by 30 spots. Now, so ladies and gentlemen, it is not only China's leap forward that defines the next century as theirs. It is more the stumbling back of the other nations. Thank you.